was slightly worried at this point because I always think that you know far more about the series than I do. I can remember.
Well, we're going to talk about your career as well.
Oh, fine, okay. Oh, my career, okay.
A very warm welcome to Crawley.
Thank you very much indeed.
Have you been here before?
I've played in the theatre in Crawley. Yeah, I think I did a thing called The Decorator a few years ago. That we played at the, I don't know, it's just sort of arts centre.
There is.
Kind of the name of the theatre.
The local theatre here is called...
That's it, the Hall, that's what it was, yeah. The Hall, yeah.
You became interested in acting at school and you joined a local amateur dramatic club. Then you applied to go to drama school. I think it was the School for Speech and Dramatic Art.
Yeah, Central School of Speech and Drama, yeah.
You were 3 years there.
I was, yeah.
Was that a useful thing to do? We had Deborah Watling here a few weeks ago, and she said drama school didn't really teach you properly how to act. It was just...
No, it doesn't teach you how to act, I think. For someone like me who came from a background that had nothing to do with theatre or television, it was quite useful because it gets you into the way things work, and that's one of the most important things, when you're starting any job.
Indeed.
Just to know the way, how you go about it, and when you have to arrive and things like that. And so you have voice lessons and movement lessons, makeup lessons, fencing lessons, and they're all pretty useless actually. And in a way, it's perfectly true that I think sometimes the teachers sit around desperately thinking of things to fill the time, because you can either do it or you can't. At the same time, they can teach you to project, I suppose, for stage work and things like that. But I think the effect it has on you is limited, quite honestly. Except insofar as you can say you've been to a drama school, and I think there's still a sort of prejudice about employing people who have not been to any sort of drama school. So the fact that you can, when you go out, when you leave, you can go to a job at the BBC and they say, where did you train? And you say Central. It means that they know that you must be of a certain standard or know what it's all about. If you say, well, I've just work in Sainsbury's. I mean, you might of course be equally as good as someone who's been to drama school, but they still will think, oh, we'll take the guy who's been to a drama school.
So it gives you the tools then, really, to do the job.
The tools and the kind of credentials, yeah.
Now, after leaving drama school, you were in rep for 3 years. That's something that happens these days, is it? Rep in the 60s and 70s, you could actually learn your trade, sharpen your technique.
Yeah.
Nowadays, there isn't really rep theatres around the country, are there? Really?
There are fewer and fewer, unfortunately, because they're not viable without a great deal of subsidy, and that's the problem. The subsidies are being cut in favour of other things, other ventures. So it is more difficult. At that time, we had the strange situation with Equity, the Actors Union, where they only handed out 2 equity cards a year to each repertory company.
Yes.
And the trouble with Equity is one of those things is you can't work without an equity card, and you can't get an equity card unless you work.
So vicious circle.
Yeah. So going into rep was one way in which you could get an equity card. Another way is to do was to do a commercial. Now, of course, it's all changed. You don't actually have to be a member of Equity in theory. I don't know if I still am or not. I haven't paid my dues for so long ago.
Once upon a time, it was a real closed shop. If you weren't in Equity, you really couldn't act.
That's absolutely right, and I think that was wrong, because in a way I think that because there were always loopholes anyway. So if you were offered a job by someone powerful enough, they go to Equity and say, well, we need a card for this person. And Equity go, oh, okay, then fine. So there are always ways around it. So I think it's much better, actually, that there isn't that sort of restrictive practice.
Then you had a period of about 18 months where you were out of work. That must have been very difficult. You've been in work for 3 years in rep, going around the country, and then being out of work, unemployed for 1.5 years. That must have been so frustrating.
Well, to a certain extent it was my own fault, because what happened was I was doing quite well doing sort of jobs in rep and a job in a fringe theatre in London. And then I did my first TV part, which was The Tomorrow People.
We'll gloss over that.
Well, the thing about The Tomorrow People was I really thought that, when I did it, it was a stupid job in which I had to wear this blonde curly wig. And I thought it would just disappear, because at that time, when I made it, programmes didn't get repeated more than about 2 years after they were made.
Indeed, yes, you're right.
And so I just thought it would disappear off the face of the earth, of course. And then came videotape and cable.
It's come back to haunt
you. And the thing has come back to haunt me endlessly now. But anyway, I did this TV part, and funnily enough, it was sort of ITV's answer to Doctor Who.
That's why they put it on, I think.
Yeah,
to try and,
they did, yeah. So there's certain irony in that. But of course, what happened was I rather liked working in television. I just sort of seemed to know what was going on and seemed to enjoy doing it. And so I decided that I would try and get more TV work. And consequently, I was out of work for 18 months. But it was me that decided not to do theatre.
I see, yeah.
So it was me that decided to change direction. But as it turned out, it was okay. But it was depressing. Yeah. And I took a job in the income tax department, Inland Revenue.
I used to work for them at one time.
Oh, did you really? Yeah.
The first major production I think I was aware of you as an actor, as being sort of two notices of you, was London Weekend Television did a series called Love for Lydia with Mel Martin in the late 70s, shown on Sunday nights, which was a period romance, I think, set in the 20s or 30s or something.
Yeah, that's right.
And you played one of her suitors.
Tom, yeah.
That was a very good production, really good quality writing, acting, the kind of thing that we don't get too often these days, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, it was one of those things that they took a lot of trouble over. I mean, we took an enormous length of time to make it.
You must have really been happy with that when you finished that.
Yeah, I was. I mean, it was. I kind of thought when I got it, it was the big break that the biggest break I would get, really. As it turned out, it wasn't. But I thought it would be when I got it. And when I got it, I was actually still working in the income tax department.
How interesting.
I went along to the. Well, funny enough, I went along to meet the producer and the director. My agent just rang up one day out of the blue after about 6 months of not speaking to him, and said, go for this part. So I went along, and they said, what have you been doing? And I said, well, I've been working with the income tax. And they were quite taken with that. I think they thought that was pretty wacky. But then there was a bookshop around the corner, and the guy who was producing it was Richard Bates, who was H.E. Bates' son, who wrote the book. Yeah. Oh. And in Twickenham, where I was working, just around the corner, there was this little old bookshop, and I'd gone round when I knew I was going up for the part to get a copy of the book, because it was out of print at that time. And I found a first edition of this book, you see.
That's worth some money.
Yeah, well, I don't know how much it was. I don't think it was worth that much, but when I told Richard Bates that I found this first edition in this bookshop, he was like, really? Where is this book? So I kind of thought I was getting in there. It was very good. So I got the part. And it took a long time to do, and there was some problems on it, because we had a change of direct halfway through.
That must have been very disconcerting.
It was, yeah, because they were concerned. What happened was we shot the first 3 episodes, and it was for London Weekend, as you said, and they decided that it was all too much in long shot. It was all a bit. I think the quote was, it was a bit too much. It was all right for BBC Two, but not for London Weekend Television.
Not enough close-ups and
not enough close-ups, and so they got another director in, and he shot everything in so much in close-up you couldn't see any of the scenery, because it was very nicely shot originally. So they had to sort of chop between the two to get the end result.
I mean, techniques have changed even since the late 70s to today. TV techniques have changed so much about how production values, I suppose, have gone up. Perhaps not always, but I mean, it's a totally different industry now.
Yes, it is. I mean, and I suppose they've learned from the film industry. I mean, one of the big things, actually, oddly enough, was that Love for Lydia was shot on video, and that was at a time when video they hadn't really done much location video stuff, but they did think at that time that video would be the way of the future for prestigious television production, that they would phase out film cameras altogether and just have everything on video. And they took an awful lot of trouble on Love for Lydia to make it look terrific, which they did.
I think they made a good job of it, actually.
But strangely enough, of course, they were completely wrong. What happened then later on was that everything that was prestigious was then done on film. The one thing that, as an actor, I know that one of the first questions you ask when they come through and say, they want you to do such and such a project, one of the first questions you ask is it on film? Because, you kind of associate a filmed thing with a prestigious look to it.
I think the quality of 35mm film is, you can't beat.
Or even Super 16, which is what they do most TV stuff on, as opposed to videotape. If it's videotape, just slightly iffy. Although they have now techniques to make videotape look like film.
the other series, I mean, if I was to ask my sister or my mother, named Peter Davison, they wouldn't even think of Doctor Who. They'd think of a TV series called The Creatures Great and Small.
Yeah.
And it's probably, actually, with the public at large, I mean, we're all very much into Doctor Who here, but I mean, the public at large, that series is probably the series that's associated with you.
I think that's true, yes.
And you had a marvellous cast, Robert Hardy, Christopher Timothy and yourself. And your part, although it wasn't sort of the central part, in some ways, playing Robert Hardy's brother, you had the better part, really, because you were always a little bit doing pranks and things.
Yeah, it was. I do think it was the best, in a way, the best part. As you said, it wasn't the biggest, but he came in and he was the light relief, the sort of comic relief, and also he came in and did the best bits, really.
Yeah, I think so, yes.
And I think it must have been, hello, come in. It must have been a bit frustrating. Well, it wasn't frustrating for Christopher Timothy, who was playing James Herriot, was actually very, very good about, when a funny bit would come up, he was always trying to give it away. He was always trying to give it to me. He said, "Oh no, Tristan would be much funnier if Tristan did this." And so I ended up with all the good bits, and of course it helped that poor Chris walked in front of a car at the end of the first series and was run over, and so couldn't really move. Couldn't really walk the whole of the second series.
Which bumped up your role somewhat.
Yeah, so I had to do all the bits that Chris was meant to be doing that were actually moving around, because Chris could only hobble out of shot.
James Herriot's novels have been very popular. I mean, there were two films in the 70s, All Creatures Great and Small, with Simon Ward, and also It Shouldn't Happen to Them with John Alderton. But for me, that series really put those books on the map, really. I mean, the public don't think of the film, they think about TV series.
Yes, they do, yeah. Well, it's ideally suited to TV, if you think about it. They're all very episodic stories. I mean, the only mistake we made, or the BBC made, I think, was that when they first started making it, typically the BBC, they didn't realise that they had a success on their hands, and they thought it would last for one series. So we were getting through maybe 4 or 5 stories per episode in the first series, and you'll notice very definitely if you see the first few episodes.
Slow pace.
There's just endless stories. I mean, the well-known stories in the books are all got through by. I mean, he's married by episode 5 of the first series or something like that. And they thought, well, we'll just get to the end of the series, that'll be it. And then when they got to the end of the series, and it was then immensely popular, they realised they had to slow down suddenly. So in the second series, you start to get maybe 3 stories. By the third series, we're doing like 1 story, and everything became far. And then they had to start inventing stories. They ran out of them, or going back. They sometimes then went back to the early stories they missed out. And then in some cases, some cases toward the end, we were repeating stories that we'd done in the early series, because it's very strange.
The thing that strikes me about that series was the great period detail, and it had a continuity to it, so that when the stories were set in a later time frame, they actually changed the period details. It was definitely, I was aware of that.
One of the best things about it was that we actually grew old. We grew older with the series, unfortunately. So we weren't trying to be the same age, because by the end of it, it got a bit ridiculous. I think by the time we finished series 7 or 8, whichever it was, I think I was just about late 30s, pushing 40, and I was still getting girlfriends who were sort of 18-year-old nurses, which was very nice. I mean, I'm not because I was the only one left who wasn't married. In fact, because you never saw Siegfried's wife, but by the later series he was meant to be married. So I was the only one who could have sort of romantic interest. So I used to get quite a lot of it, but I usually got dumped by the end of the episode, so I could get a new one the next week.
It must have been lovely working with Robert Hardy, because he's such a good actor.
Oh yeah.
He really has like a twinkle in his eye.
Yeah.
He can. You must have learnt a lot with him, I'm sure.
It's just not the great thing about it is not know you never know what he's going to do next. He's never the same twice. I mean, he'll rehearse we used to rehearse those episodes for 2 weeks, and he would be doing something different every time you rehearsed it. And us normal actors, us sort of boring down to earth actors, what we do over the period of a rehearsal period is to sort of refine what we're doing down to a kind of definitive performance. So that when we get to the studio, we get to the filming day, we're doing it the best way we think we can. But Robert Hardy kind of doesn't work like that. He every single time he does it, it's like something new comes into his head. So he's flying off in a different tangent. And the only problem with that is that it's sort of pot luck whether you get the best thing in the take. Do you know what I mean?
You must miss your cue, surely, because obviously you're waiting for to say.
Well, but that's really good, because you you never quite know what's happening. There's one great scene where I thought it was great. It was great to do in All Creatures, where he's testing me on an exam I'm going to have to take for, because I'm still meant to be at veterinary school in the first series, and he's throwing these things at me, and we did about 3 takes of it, and each time he would do it completely differently, and I was just not used to this, and I was kind of like desperately trying to keep up with him. But it was really exciting. But as I say, he was annoyed with himself quite often, because he would do brilliant things in rehearsal, and then he wouldn't quite work as brilliantly on the take, because he would just be doing everything differently, and it was magic to work with. But I can understand it.
Stressful.
But not in a bad way. Great. But I just felt sorry for him sometimes, because we do it maybe one day in rehearsal, and it would be just brilliant, and then get to the take, and he wouldn't do it the same way. He doesn't seem to be able to, pare everything down and think, okay, this is the moment to do it, because his brain's working.
It certainly gave it a spontaneity,
Oh, yeah,
I
absolutely.
suppose, that it wouldn't have had if it had been rehearsed to death. Now, one of the unit production managers on that was John Nathan Turner, who obviously since went on to do a similar job at Doctor Who and then became a producer.
Yeah.
So obviously he was aware of when he went to Doctor Who, he must have had you in mind, perhaps.
I think of that, as it turned out, yes, he did. I mean, I knew nothing about it until he rang me up after I'd finished. Well, after we thought we'd finished All Creatures, we'd done 3 series and we stopped. And about a year after that, while I was doing a couple of comedy series, he rang up and one night rang me up at home and just said that Tom Baker was leaving Doctor Who. And I didn't really catch on to why he was telling me this. And then he said, how do you feel about being the next Doctor?
That must have been very difficult, because it's very, very flattered to be asked to do a leading character in a series like that. But I'm thinking of your career up to that stage. You're doing good work. You're taking over from actor who's doing that role for 7 years, who's really, in the public's mind, has become identified with that role more than any other perhaps actor up to that point. You must have really had a difficult time with no way to accept the role in that, really.
I did, yeah. Not least because I had sort of grown up with Doctor Who. And I watched it from the first episode, really. And when I'd become an actor, I'd often thought about being in Doctor Who, but I'd never thought about actually being Doctor Who. That's a bigger leap than I'd imagined. And yeah, it did worry me that people hadn't. Tom had been doing it for 7 years, and people had got very much used to him. And I'd just come out of a long-running, what I thought was a long-running series. Heavens, it's only 3 years,
Yes,
but
that's true.
But in the end, it was just too good a thing to turn down. Do you know what I mean? Initially, I think I did turn it down, and he said, "Well, meet me for lunch and talk about it." So we went
He
out.
convinced you to do the role.
Well, he paid for lunch. And so in the end, I just thought, well, if I turn it down, this sounds a really pathetic reason to actually accept a job, but it really partly was this. But I thought if I turned it down, and then someone else does it, I can't go around saying, I was offered that first. So, and it was such a great thing to be offered. I thought the only thing I can do is to do it, and because I can't sort of let it slip by without telling people, I was offered Doctor Who. So I thought, well, I'll do it, and it certainly got my name known. Before that, I think I was very well known, but I was known as that bloke in the vet series, or just. And I think the thing about Doctor Who is your name is sort of pushed forward. So
yeah, well, you're playing a leading character,
yeah,
aren't you? You're in most of the
character,
scenes.
your name is on the top of the series, yeah.
Well, when you came on to the series Doctor Who, how did you get on with the series regulars? Because you had Sarah Sutton, Janet Fielding and Matthew Waterhouse, who had worked with Tom Baker. You were the new boy, so to speak.
Yeah.
Although you're playing the main part. Did you gel quickly, or was there a little bit of friction there, or did you?
There was no friction there at all, really, because I don't think they got on particularly well with Tom. So I think I was somewhat a kind of a relief from that, of the stress, actually, rather than relief from friction, rather than being the cause of any friction.
Did you feel the characters being written for you as an actor, or did you think some of the scripts were as if it was still Tom Baker?
Oh, some of the scripts were definitely commissioned for Tom. I mean, they were commissioned because they're commissioned way ahead of time, a lot of them. And so I think that they hastily wrote Castrovalva. That was written as a sort of, the changeover story. But I think certainly Forward to Doomsday was written with Tom in mind, and certainly a couple of other early ones were. But you don't really feel that. I mean, you don't really have that much input. I used to talk to John Nathan Turner a lot about, what I thought, the way the series ought to go. I don't think he took a blind bit of notice, actually, because why should he? I was just playing the part. Actually, he should have taken notice. But it was too late by then. The scripts were commissioned. I saw the script, and if there was something I didn't think fitted, I would say to him. But then you couldn't really change it. You could change things a bit in rehearsal. But I didn't feel as if I was still in Tom's shadow, if that's what you mean, when I started. As far as the public was concerned, yes, I think I did feel like I was in Tom's shadow, but not in terms of the production team. Because Tom, I think, he's completely different sort of character to me anyway. But I think he had got a bit, I can't really...
Bored with the role?
Bored with the role, yes, and frustrated with the production team, and had sort of taken it out on them in not in a particularly unpleasant way, but in a forceful way that he can do.
I think if you look at his last season, you look at your first season was pretty strong, and it was certainly better than his last season. Without being too critical, I think the second season was a bit weak in terms of the scripts.
It was,
I don't think there's anything in your performance that could cope with that. I mean, they weren't as strong as the first season.
It was weak in terms of script and in terms of money available to make the scripts into sort of reality. And indeed, the thing is that I had to make my decision to leave at the end of the second season. And that's partly why I said I would leave after 3 years, because of the second season. So I was actually I thought the third season was better. So. But yeah, it was. I mean, and it culminated in this story which I've got this flack about, this video, this thing where I apparently called the series crap. Everyone thought. We were talking about Time Flight, you see, which was at the end of the second.
Taken out of context.
Yeah, completely out of context, and it was, it was Time Flight. I didn't think it was that bad a script, actually. It was Peter Grimway, but the way we had to do it, which was...
There was lack of money on that, I think.
It was total lack of money. We ended up acting with lumps of polystyrene inside Studio 8. And, when I made this remark, it was really trying to explain it was frustrating to rehearse something and, work it all out and make it work. And then you get in the studio and you see the conditions you have to make it under. And you know that it's going to end up crap because there is not enough money to make it. And it goes back to the old story, Doctor Who earned millions of pounds for the BBC and it all went somewhere else.
Indeed, yeah.
And we were left with Black Drapes and Studio 8. Also, at that time, it was a time when there was not exactly trouble, but it was difficult, BBC and unions. And you'd end up with the lights being turned on, the studio stopping at 10 o'clock, regardless as to whether you'd finished or not. So, and so
in the middle of the tape.
Well, yeah, and there's a great sort of story in one of the stories we did in. Actually, I think it was the third season. Don't ask me what it was called. I can't remember. But where we'd rehearsed this scene, this culminating scene to this whole story in this particular set, and when it got to 5 to 10. They didn't have time to light it, and the production assistant said to me, I said to all of us, just go on into the TARDIS set and say the lines. So we don't know where we're standing, and this was the climax to this entire story, the confrontation, which should have been in another set entirely, and they just said, just go on and just say the lines, just say the lines. And of course, you get a certain thrill out of it because it's a bit like live television. It's a bit like you're doing. You're sort of making up. The cameramen are following you around. They don't know where you're going to be standing. But when you look at it back, it's rubbish. no one knows where they're meant to be. And yet, we had to do it because we couldn't go beyond 10 o'clock. And if we hadn't done it, the program would have been unfinished and would have been, worthless. So it was all those sort of frustrations in that second season.
You mentioned that you made a decision to leave after the end of the second season. Was it any truth? I've read somewhere you met Patrick Troughton in the BBC car park.
Yeah.
And he suggested to you that do the series for more than 3 years could hurt you in your future career.
No,
Is that true?
It is true, but it actually happened way before then. It actually happened just when I started Doctor Who. And what was funny was that, you know, the best thing about being in Doctor Who, I shouldn't say this in a room full of Doctor Who fans, but is that you could get into the BBC car park. They have the television centre, and they have what they call the Horseshoe car park. It's all changed a bit now, but they used to have what they call the Horseshoe car park. Nobody can get in the Horseshoe car park except the executives on the 6th floor, you see, unless you're Doctor Who. Now, for 3 years when he was doing the part, Patrick Troughton had no problem getting into the car park. And I met him when I was driving to the BBC, and but the thing is, you try and get into the car park, you see, that's the thing, you try and bluff your way in, and you don't get in if you know. And of course, he was in front of me. Patrick Troughton, ex-Doctor Who, got turned away from the car park because he arrived and he was doing something he wanted to do. Got it, remonstrating with the security guards. You know, no, I'm doing this part, I'm doing it. Oh, sorry, you have to go down the road, try and find something to park. And I came up behind him, so I got in no problem. And I'd worked with him on All Creatures anyway, so we bumped into each other on the foyer after he'd gone down the road and parked his car half a mile away. And he just said to me, you know, well, it's great, do it for 3 years, then get out. And that was the advice I kind of had in the back of my mind. But it wasn't really deeply profound advice. It was just, you know, that's what he'd done it for. And I'd done All Creatures for 3 years, and I kind of thought 3 years was a good length of time to do something for. In my mind, you know, it was not too short, not too long. So I did go back to that advice when I was asked by John, you know, do you want to stay for a 4th year? And it was a difficult decision. It's very difficult to turn down that sort of security in a way.
I can understand that, yes.
But on the other hand, you know, actors, we find security a little daunting, because although it's great to know that you're going to be earning, you know, good money for, you know, the next 2 years, at the same time, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're doing something solidly for a period of time, it means that nothing else can happen. You know, we live on this fantasy that the phone could ring tomorrow. You know,
indeed.
And, you know, I could be whisked off to Hollywood or whatever, because it's very unlikely to happen.
Very nice.
But the fact of the matter is that the thing that keeps us going when we're out of work is that there's endless possibilities when you're out of work. You know, something great could happen, and if you're committed, that's why I can't. You know, I can't
turn that offer down because you're committed to a TV series.
So people who are committed to, you know, soap operas for years and years and years, I think they must sort of kiss goodbye to that whole side of it, which is a very important thing. That who knows, something great might happen tomorrow.
I think it's true to say that in the 3rd season, the series found its 2nd win, because probably that was the strongest season of all in some respects.
I think it probably was, yeah.
The scripts were better, the money seemed to have improved a little bit as well. And perhaps, you know, you've been playing the role for 3 years as well, so we're in the 3rd year, and it was gelling a little bit, you know, you're working.
Yeah, the irony is, of course, I think if I'd been asked the question after the 3rd year, I probably would have gone on for another year, you see, that's what I mean. I was much happier with the 3rd season, but overall, I was quite glad that I went out at the end of the 3rd season, because I think it was quite good, and the last story, I think, was probably the best story.
It was a very, very strong story, though. Very strong story. One of the things I liked about the character you played, he was a very vulnerable character in some respects. He always felt that he'd put himself behind the assistants. He'd always put his life in front of the others to try and protect them. I never felt that with the other doctors. I always felt that they were a little bit, you know, I'm never quite sure what they were up to really. But your character, the way you played it, was that you were very concerned about the characters. And when they left the series, you might spend several episodes bemoaning the fact that they'd left you.
Yeah,
because as it would happen if a real friend had left you, you would feel that.
Yeah, I mean, I did think that I hadn't watched very much of Tom as the Doctor. I mean, my main Doctor was actually Patrick Troughton.
Same for me, yes.
But I just remember one scene, which to me, although I know Tom was very successful, I wouldn't knock his time as the Doctor at all, except that but there was one bit I remember. I can't remember the story or anything. I just remember there was some pendulum that was about to slice him in two, in one of the stories, and he started offering jelly babies around, which was quite, it was quite funny in a kind of an undergrad sort of Douglas Adams type sort of way. But the trouble with it is, it just didn't work from my point of view, because
it ruined the tension totally.
Yeah, it ruined the tension. And you thought, well, a lot of what you do as doctor is, when you're in rehearsal, is fairly ridiculous. I mean, you do have to suspend your disbelief.
You have to play the character straight. Yes.
Yeah, you have, but when it comes to this, you have to play it straight, and you can be as. And I was all for putting in funny bits, but when it comes to the nitty gritty, I just thought, you have to play it for real, if you like. It sounds sort of slightly pretentious, that, but I do think it was important, because otherwise it doesn't work. And if I wasn't concerned about the companions, then what am I doing there? If I'm this concerned character, I just think it just worked for me. I think I wasn't, so I had to change it to make it. And I quite like ensemble, although it wasn't when I was the doctor and the sort of star of it, but I quite like ensemble things where everyone is sort of in it together.
Yeah, giving their own piece towards the piece of work. One of the strongest stories for me, you mentioned Case of Androzani, I think that was a very strong story as well. But Earthshock is one that particularly I liked.
Yeah.
That was very well made. It had a good story, very claustrophobic. Had a lot of money to spend on it. It seemed to, from looking at it on the TV set anyway. And it brought back my favourite villains as the Cybermen.
Yeah, me too.
I always think the Daleks have been overused in Doctor Who. They tend to be, they're always there, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, for a time though, I was like worried I wasn't going to do a story with the Daleks, because at that time Terry Nation didn't want anyone else to write a Dalek story, and he didn't want to write one. So it did look for a while as if I wouldn't do a Dalek story. But my favourite enemies, if you like, were the Cybermen.
And that was a strong story. They hadn't been used, I think, for 8 years or something before that. So they certainly hadn't been overused up to that time. And you had Beryl Reid in it, and it was a good story.
Yeah, it was my favourite story for a long, long time. That up until the last story I did, I think I did. See, I liked Eric Sayward's stories. I thought he was good at writing those.
Sorry about his fly.
Sorry. Bit of action.
I mean, until up to the end of the first episode, we're not sure the Cybermen are going to be there, because it's called Earthshock. It wasn't.
Yeah.
They weren't mentioned.
No, it's good. Yeah.
We had no real reason to know who they were until sort of a quarter way into the story.
Yeah.
Which is another thing I like about it.
Yeah.
It was who's the villain.
Yeah. Now, as I say, I thought Eric was sort of not underrated exactly, but I just thought he was really good. I liked his stories a lot. I think he had a great sense of drama, and I liked him as a script editor too.
When you left Doctor Who, you did a job for BBC presenting. I think it was called L Driver, which is unusual for an actor to want to become a presenter.
I didn't want to become a presenter, but they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I'd never done it before, so it was just something I thought I'd like to try. I'm very, very wary of presenting, because I do think that if you get into presenting as an actor, that's it. There's no way back. And I think had I sort of formed that opinion in my mind then, I wouldn't have done L Driver. But it was aimed very specifically at people who couldn't drive, but also were actually from another country. It wasn't just for any sort of ordinary driver.
Indeed.
It was. I remember they kept telling me to talk slower. So it was almost like that English thing abroad, If the foreigners don't understand, you just talk slowly and more loudly.
Yes.
I remember them telling me that, and unfortunately I have a habit because it was on an auto cue, and I'd never used auto cue before. I just have a habit of speeding up. I don't want to give.
You also did a couple of sitcoms. You did Holding the Fort for Weekend Television and Sink or Swim for the BBC.
Yeah.
Then you came back to do All Creatures Great and Small. Now that must have been difficult, because you're talking about typecasting earlier. You've done 3 years of All Creatures Great and Small, 3 years of Doctor Who. And you've been asked to come back to play a character which is probably one you're best known for, Tristan Farnham. Was that difficult to make that decision to come back?
No, actually it wasn't difficult at all. I mean, we'd stopped because we were all afraid. We stopped in 1980 and we did it for 3 seasons. And we stopped because we all thought, well, that's it, we've done it now. And the series is now, they were all going off to war. And we were afraid of, being typecast. And and so we stopped. I went off and did these comedy series, and a couple of other sort of one-off things. And then when they finally came back, and initially they said come back and do a Christmas special. That was meant to be it. And we came back and did that, and that was set after the war. And then it just didn't seem a problem.
They got very good ratings, that Christmas special.
Yes, it got very good ratings.
The impetus to
That's right.
carry on with the series.
That's right. But then it just didn't seem a problem. You know, we'd all done other things, and we were no longer afraid. I wasn't. Certainly, I'd done enough things to think, well, even if I do this now, I can still go off and do other things afterwards. It won't affect me the way I thought it might. So it was fine, and it was actually very nice because, you know, it was set after the war, so we weren't picking it up exactly. As I say, we'd grown older, and it actually had been almost exactly the right time by the time we started the series. It'd been almost exactly the length of the war since we'd done the last going after war story. So we were virtually the age we were meant to be.
And I like the way that it was definitely set in a different period. You could tell that by the period clothes, the cars, even the telephones. They've really done their homework.
Oh yes,
Which I think the BBC are very good at. Well, they used to be anyway, but they're not so good now. But people have moved on. You've done a number of things since then. One series I particularly liked, and although the public I don't think gelled it, was Campion. I thought that was a superb series, very well acted, good production values again. But it didn't really sort of click with the public, which was very sad, I think.
Yeah, you know, there were a couple of problems, really. One was that it was the last of the BBC series that were made at a leisurely pace. You know, it used to be, it was really almost, it was literally the last one where they sort of say, I'll go off on vacation for a couple of months and make this. You know, there was really no pressure to actually finish the thing. And then suddenly a whole new wave of things came, you know, dictates came in where you had to finish an episode in 10 days and stuff like that. But the other problem is, unfortunately, that I think Marjorie Allingham was a really good writer, and the books I think are much better than the sort of Agatha Christie books, the equivalent books. But oddly enough, they don't transfer quite so well to television. They're almost too complex.
Yes.
You know, they're very complex plots, much more so than Agatha Christie, who I did a Miss Marple once. I remember an old actress who was in that saying to me, she hated Agatha Christie, and she just said to me, "No, it's absolutely ridiculous." I know all she did was she used to write the book and then look back and think, who's the least likely character to have done it, and just made it then. You know, so, it's my agent. Whereas. Should we get that answer now?
Sorry.
Nice.
Oh, they're gone.
You know, whereas Marjorie Allingham created these very complex plot lines, and also, well, I had the feeling, I think it could have been successful, but I think what they needed to do was actually, it sounds almost like heresy to say it, but taken less regard of the books, and just, they had two great characters there. You know, you had Campion and then you had Lug, and we didn't have enough together. They didn't develop that side of the character because of the books. In a funny kind of way, I think it would almost been better if they'd had the story sort of based loosely on the books and just created this series around these two characters.
Indeed. I think they ran it for 2 series of the BBC. They really did try and get it off the ground. But as I say, it didn't really click, which is a shame, I think. I think it's one I wish they would show again, really.
Yes, yeah, I think they did show it once on UK Gold or something like that when they repeated it, but it hasn't been shown since. Right now.
You've done a number of other things that have really impressed me. I'm going more up to date now. I mean, it's a peculiar sort of practice, which was very, very strong. Did you enjoy doing that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I thought it was really well written, and it was written by Andrew Davis, who's done a lot of adapting actually.
Yes, he's very good, isn't he? I mean, he's like the man of the moment, really.
Yeah. Well, he made those books, the Michael Dobbs books, into actually series that were much better than the books. You know, I can't remember what they're called now. What are they called? You know, the thing about a set of Parliament.
House of Cards.
House of Cards. He adapted House of Cards. I know lots of people who then went out and bought the book and thought, "Oh, this is no good at all." He'd actually created something that was much better. But funnily enough, the reason that he wrote Peculiar Practice was because he very cleverly then wrote this into the series. But he ended up owing the BBC £17,000 because they'd paid him to adapt something, and he had failed to come up with the goods. He then said, "Oh, I can't do this thing." And they said, "Well, we paid you £17,000. We want it back." So he said, "Oh, well, I'll write something else then." So he then wrote Peculiar Practice in about a day and a half. And sent it in.
As quickly as that?
Well, I don't know, it was then. But it was actually it was really quick. It was about 3 weeks, I think, they said.
It's very well written.
Oh yeah, it was brilliantly well written. But once he gets on, I remember, funnily enough, the director, David Tucker, told me the story about the second series, which he didn't want to write because it was meant to be just a one-off. And they'd asked him to write the second series, and he said, "Oh, no." He said, "No, I've got no ideas. I've got no ideas about it at all." And they forced him to put in this outline for this second series, which was pretty naff, apparently. It was a bit like, "Oh, let's go back to the beginning of the first series. Like, everything goes back to normal." And the director, David Tucker, rang him up and said, "Look, this is no good at all." He said, "How about doing something, different, like having an American principal at the university coming in or something like that?" And Andrew Davis just said, "Oh yeah, that's an interesting idea. Okay, I'll get back to you." And the following week, 3 new episodes arrived on David Tucker's doormat. He just sat down and thought, "Oh, this is a good idea. I'll do this." And next thing you know, you have a series. So once he gets the sort of bug inside him, he'll just write. But it was never meant to be an ongoing series. It was meant to be just a one-off series. And they managed to persuade him to write a second series, and then one special that we filmed in Poland. But it was great to do. It was, I think, the best written thing I've done.
Yes, it was very good. Another thing that impressed me about a year ago was you appeared in Wuthering Heights. And this got a little drubbing from the critics.
Oh yeah, I did.
Now,
Yeah.
there have been many versions of this. So there's the Laurence Olivier Miller version from the 30s, I think Tiffany Dalton did a version in the 70s.
Yeah.
And there's a very good version about 4 or 5 years ago with Ralph Fiennes and Juliette Binoche. But it never actually been done really properly to the book.
Yeah.
This adaptation was very, very faithful to the Bronte novel.
Yeah, it was.
And although your part wasn't very big, it was an important part.
I don't know quite why it got the drumming. I think because you can't. It's one of those you can't win. I mean, I think people actually probably would quite enjoy it if they sat down and watched it. But as far as critics are concerned, it's one of those books that I think you're always going to get a drubbing from. As you said, it was very accurate to the book. But the problem is that no film can ever do the whole book. It's almost like you have to do a bit of the book,
yes,
or a plotted thing of the book. And I think probably it's one of those things where a lot of the critics actually aren't basing what they're watching on the book. They're basing it on the Laurence Olivier film or whatever. And they're comparing it to that. They're not actually
probably not very
they're
faithful
not,
to the
no,
original
exactly.
novel at all,
They're not
yes.
comparing it to the actual original work. So there's a shame that. But I mean, it didn't really worry me. I didn't sort of take it personally because I wasn't that involved in it. But it was nice to be light relief in Wuthering Heights. Is there light relief in Wuthering Heights?
Well, I think a little bit, yeah, certainly. The other thing I was very impressed with in terms of your performance and the production was a thing called Verdicts
Oh, yeah.
on ITV. What I liked about that was it's left up to the audience really to make up their own minds about it. Although you were actually acquitted at the end,
Yeah.
there was the suggestion there that you might have been guilty, which is very clever.
There's more than a suggestion. Yeah, because it was the most extraordinary thing I think I've ever done in some respects, because you have a jury there who make up their mind.
Indeed, yes.
And it's treated very much, as far as possible, like a jury. I mean, they only see what you see in terms of, what they have to make up their mind on. But they're selected in a jury-like way, and they have to come along, and then they are sent off into a room, and they're kept away from you, and you're told that if you sort of see them in the canteen, you're not to speak to them or anything like that. And when I started off, I got the script and I read the script, and I thought, well, maybe he is guilty, So maybe it's a possibility he could have done it. So maybe I'll play it like that, But then you realise, of course, that whether you're guilty or innocent of a crime, if you're on trial, you're going to be doing your best to get off, aren't you? I mean, whether you're guilty or innocent.
Indeed, yes,
you're not guilty.
You're right, mate.
And that overtook me completely, and I just suddenly then thought, I want to get off. I really don't want to be found guilty. So any thoughts that I was guilty went out the window. And I was just thinking, this is my challenge now, I've got to get off. And given that anybody in real life is guilty or innocent is trying to get off. If they had found me guilty in that television program, it's a bit like having failed as an actor. Because what they're in effect saying was, we don't believe you. You've done your best to act as if you're innocent, and we don't think you've been convincing, so you're guilty. So I was, and when I was, what happens is you finish the recording of the actual, scripted bit. The jury go off, and you're left for 2 hours while they talk about it in a room, which is also filmed. And then you come back for the verdict, and you don't know what the verdict is. And when they literally put the cameras on, and you're brought back into the dock, and you're standing there, me, the actor, and then the judge.
You have no idea what.
You have no idea what the verdict is.
So you really were.
So there's a camera on you, a camera on the person who's accused you, the camera on the barristers and stuff. And then they say, do you find the defendant guilty or innocent? They say, not guilty. And so the reaction you have is absolutely purely natural, and that's worrying because it's like you're not in control, And I worried more about if I was found guilty, the reaction you'd have, because the initial reaction would be, "What the bloody hell are you talking about?" And so I was thinking, but I was gripping onto this rail, thinking, Christ, what's going to happen if they find me guilty?
It was a strong performance that, though, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, it was desperate performance. I was trying to get off.
It gave you a darker side, I think, to your
It did, yeah, because there were certainly things in there that implied that I could be guilty, and it's a whole, dodgy area, that whole sort of date rape business. Anyway, so there were indications that she might have had a reason for saying that I'd done it, and indications why I might have been guilty. But I found out afterwards, this is why I'm particularly proud of this, is that I was told afterwards that the writer had based it on a sort of newspaper story of a school teacher who's involved in this kind of thing, and he was actually found guilty. Retrial.
I think at this stage we'll open this up a little bit. Does anybody like to ask Peter Davison a question about his career? At all? Either Doctor Who related or non-Doctor Who related?
Is there anything I missed out?
Any questions for Peter Davison at all?
I've got a question. I'm right in saying that, the comedy series Mixed Blessings?
Yeah.
You have something to do with theme tune?
Yeah, I wrote the theme tune. Yes,
really?
I wrote the theme tune to Mixed Blessings, yeah. Mixed Blessings.
Yeah.
Because, how did it come about? Because the guy who was starring in it was Chris Blake, who'd been in Love for Lydia, and who I'd been at drama school with, and he knew that I wrote songs. So when he got this series, he just phoned me up and said, "Look, I'm doing this comedy series." He had ideas about being a singer, and he said, "Why don't you write something, and we'll see if we can get him to put it on." So I wrote something, and we recorded it in my bedroom. Actually, it sounded good. Actually, it sounded better than the actual theme tune. And we took it to them, and they said, "Yeah, great." So it was actually released as a single. I think sold about 3 copies. And I also wrote the theme tune to Button Moon, this children's series on the afternoon, which I'm actually singing on that. So yes, I've done a bit of that stuff. Yeah, it's kind of good.
Any other questions?
Peter, you've done a couple of pantomimes.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about being in pantomime as opposed to sort of more straight work?
I don't mind. My agent gives me a hell of a time when I do pantomime because he doesn't think I should be doing it. But I quite enjoy doing it actually, because I'm one of these people who finds it a bit frustrating at Christmas, but everything sort of stops. You have sort of 3 days of eating too much and then 3 days of recovering from that. So I quite like the idea of being busy at Christmas. And pantomime, you're sure as hell get busy. So I quite enjoy doing it. I think I might stop now for a while. I think because last time I did it, this past Christmas actually, I was in Cambridge and I played Buttons. And I just this notion that I might be getting a bit old. It was fun, but and the only other thing is now if I'm too old to play like Buttons or whatever the other wishy-washy, whatever character it is, there are 2 ways you can go. You can either be an ugly sister, Baker, which I really don't fancy doing, or you can be the evil Baron, where everyone hisses and boos at you when you come out. And I'm not sure that would work either because of me, because a couple of years ago I did this play in the West End, Dine for Murder,
Very good that was.
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed doing it, but I was playing a very, very nasty character. And for the first 15 minutes of the play, you don't realise this. You think he's very, if you haven't, unless you haven't seen the film, you think he's a very nice, affable guy. And then gradually you realise that he's absolutely awful. He's, plotting to have his wife murdered. And there were times when we were touring it before it went into the West End, where there was almost an audible gasp of horror when they discovered that I was playing this unpleasant character. You see, and they really didn't like it. And in fact, they didn't like the fact I was playing an unpleasant character. The good thing was that when I got to the end of the play, they kind of wished I'd got off, that I'd escaped. So I don't know about playing the evil Baron. Because you're meant to come on, everyone's meant to go, woo, hiss. I probably come on, they go, ah. So I don't know, I think I might retire from pantomime for a while.
I'm curious, playing a role in the West End, is it, obviously it must be a little bit more difficult than playing it when you're playing out in the stick, so to speak. Do you have to, is there a different technique involved, would you say?
No, I don't think there's a different technique. I mean, you adapt the play. I think it's got to be better, actually, in a way. I mean, you can get away. I don't think Dine for Murder did change. I think it was good. It was the same cast virtually, and it was a good show on the road and a good show in town. But unfortunately, there are a lot of shows that tour around that just would not make it in the West End because they're just not good enough. I think, and that's slightly worrying. That I think that people can put on fairly duff tours sometime and think that people out in the provinces are going to buy it, because you don't know what you're going to get.
But when you started playing that role, were you aware at some stage it would transfer to the West End?
No, I mean, well, I thought that it would be quite nice if it did, but I didn't know for sure it was going to at all. But I think you just have to get it spot on for the West End. That's the way I feel. I feel that they may be slightly harder to please.
Yes, in the tougher audience, maybe.
Yeah, because they paid so much more money for a start.
That must be nice. Any other questions for Peter Davison at all?
When you were in All Features Great and Small, I know you had to have some sort of veterinary person around to give you assistance, but most of the stunts you did were your own.
Oh, you mean like stunts like Arm Up Cow?
I wasn't going to say that.
No, they were entirely. I mean, tell you the truth, I couldn't believe it at first. But because I didn't believe it was even possible. But, what you don't realise, and I've told people this since I've done it, because I know it to be true, is that if you're a country vet, you spend most of your life with your arm up a cow, because that's the first thing they seem to do. You go out and you visit the farmer. And the farmer said, "Oh, my cow's got a cold." So the vets take arm straight up the cow. What happened was because I was playing this sort of studenty character, whose whole ethic in life was to avoid having anything to do with animals, even though he's trying to be a vet. Chris Timothy, I think, went around for a week with the vet that was our advisor on the programme, to get some experience. I didn't do that, so it all came as a very nasty shock to me. And when I read in the script, I thought I'd avoid it completely. I read in episode 4, Tristan is there, stripped to the waist, arm up a cow. I thought, and up until the last moment, I thought, well, maybe they're going to just do trick photography, but no, you get there, and there's the vet there saying, "Oh, well, what you do, Peter, is you get your arm straight up the cow." You go, okay, and of course, in those days, it was set then in 1937. They didn't, as they would now, they didn't have rubber gloves. They just put your hand in soapy water. But I have to say that it was a blessing that the day I did it for the first time, it was I think some March or something like that. It was freezing cold, and the only warm part of my body was this arm. And it's not. I mean, you get quite blasé because in the end, it's not as bad as you think. It's far worse. The 2 weeks thinking about doing it were far worse than actually doing it. So
they did say that you were the small, looking after the small vets, letting Siggy
Well, actually, I have to say the one person who did avoid it, I think almost exclusively, I think they finally got him to do it once, was Robert Hardy. He was a sort of countryman. You think he'd be the first to say, "Oh, that's fine." No way. He avoided it if he possibly could. But they're not going to bother with either getting stand-ins for us or doing trick photography. If they got the actors there, they've paid for them. You know, they're going to say, sorry, you've got to do it. And it was okay. That's fine.
Couple more questions?
Following on the veterinary thing, Peter, I'm actually a vet.
Really? I'm not shaking you by the hand.
Well, I missed you actually because you went to St Tiggywinkles a few years ago.
Oh, that's right,
And
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
their vet, but
Oh,
they didn't
right,
tell me you were
okay.
coming, which
Yeah.
devastated me completely. How did you get into going to that?
To Tiggywinkles?
Yeah.
I think it was through Colin, actually. I
Colin,
think it was
yeah.
Colin who was involved in it. And it was quite close to where I used to live. And so he just said, you know, do you want to come along, you know, down to this place? And so I said, yeah, sure. It's quite, and I think also I had actually at one point taken a hedgehog there.
Oh, right.
Years before, when they were in a slightly different place, it wasn't that
That's
nice.
right, it was in Aylesbury itself.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. But we had this, I think, three-legged hedgehog sort of in our garden once, so we wrapped it up, put it in a box and took it up to this place we've been told about.
Yeah.
But it's great there. I mean, you are surrounded by the most extraordinary sort of, you know, group of sort of wild animals, and it's, you know, loads of hedgehogs and badgers and all that sort of stuff. I mean, the smell is quite daunting sometimes if you're not, you know, so, but it's a great place.
Yeah. Do you ever get any sort of veterinary works? I know like Christopher Timothy is narrating this thing, Robert Hard has opened a couple of practices.
I get sometimes. I suppose the stuff that Christopher Timothy is too busy to do. Because I suppose he'd be the primary. The nearest I've done is doing pedigree chum. Pedigree chum. Yeah, a couple of things I get, but I suppose he would be the prime. Because one of the things is, of course, my character was always trying to avoid it so diligently. You know, he's hardly the best. It always makes me laugh when people, you know, come up to me in the street and say this thing that they think no one has ever said before, which is, "Oh, my dog's sick. Would you mind having a look at it?" And I think, well, Tristan is the last character you should say that to. 'Cause he's like, "No way, I'm not doing anything to do with it."
Any more questions?
Do you have a favourite piece of work that you've done, like in all the work you've done in your career? Do you have a favourite?
It's very difficult. One of the things is you have to enjoy everything you're doing really in order to sort of do it, I think, well. But I have great nostalgia for Tristan, and you know, and Doctor Who was like every child's dream of sort of saving the universe every week. So that was great. But I suppose, as far as just the quality of the actual thing of the actual piece that I've done, probably Very Peculiar Practice, I think, was probably the best written. And in the end, you can't beat something that's well written. It was the only thing that I've ever done where you didn't want to change a word of it. You know, when you get the script. I mean, even All Creatures, and certainly Doctor Who, you know, you were saying, well, can I say this instead? You know, but with Peculiar Practice, you really just wanted to say it as written down to the last and but.
Didn't want to change the script
Yeah,
at all.
yeah. So far more how you'd approach a play, where you wouldn't dream about approaching a play and going, oh, shall I say this instead? You know, Noel Coward wrote this, but can I say this? So yeah, probably that would be, you know, the thing I think I've done that's best.
One of the sort of last things I think you acted in was something called Parting Shots with director Michael Winner. I think John Cleese, this is a British comedy.
Well, maybe.
What can we infer from that?
Well, you know, I don't know if this thing will ever see the light of day. I mean, I've not heard anything about it. I mean, it was done, I did it last year. I guess about this time last year.
There's a British comics, there's quite a lot of stars in this, aren't
A
there?
lot of stars. I don't know how the heck he persuaded all these people to be in it, because I'd run a mile now if Michael were not me apart. But but you know, I've seen a Michael Winner I've seen a Michael Winner comedy before. I couldn't see the bloody joke. But, so I don't know. You know, I may be proved wrong, but it didn't seem to me in the slightest bit amusing. But you know, what can I say? I'm going to get into trouble for this. Whoa! On videotape. No, I didn't. Well, as you probably gather, I didn't get on particularly well with him.
I've met him a few times myself. He's very. He's a bit in your face a little bit, isn't he? He's a little bit full of himself.
Yes, you could put it like that. Yeah, I mean, you know, what I thought after a while with working with this man, who seemed to think that
Opinionated.
he was the greatest director that you know, the world had ever known, was that actually, in terms of amount of stuff that actually I've done in terms of series or filmed television, far exceeds the length of his entire films put together. And I think I was a bit daunted at first, and then I realised that, well, I think still this is the truth, that he actually doesn't know how to make a film. Because I don't think he's ever watched anybody else's film. He's ever watched his own films, you know. And I mean, I'm not convinced he knows how to put a film together. I really am not. Whoops! What the hell? But you know, it may turn out to be the greatest comedy that you know, we've seen in this country since Four Weddings and whatever. I don't know, but to me, I just didn't get it. I couldn't see it.
I'll tell you something about Michael Winner. This is the set of one of the Death Wish films he was directing, and he called Charles Bronson Sir all the time, and that surprised me. He called him Sir.
He does it as a kind of he does do that as a kind of almost mocking deference, and I'm not sure if it is. I know he did to Robert Mitchum as well at one point. I think he hated him apparently. Yeah. Well, you see, if you think about it, the only film that's been successful that Michael Winner's ever made, I think, is Death Wish.
And the sequels, yeah.
Well, the sequels up to a point, yeah.
Yeah,
And
to a certain degree, I suppose.
but they were pretty duff old films, and I think. And have you ever seen a film called Bull? I think it's Bullseye.
Oh my goodness.
Have you ever seen this film?
I have.
I mean, now, come on. I stand by, can this man make a film? I watched this film in disbelief.
Yeah.
What is this film about? I mean, how did this film get made? Who provided the money? I don't know. And I also saw a film called Chorus of Disapproval.
That wasn't too bad.
Well, he managed to get, no, Anthony Hopkins was very good in it, but he did manage to get, which I think is an extraordinary achievement, he managed to get a terrible, over-the-top performance out of Jeremy Irons. How do you do that? I mean, here you have an actor who is like so subtle sometimes he just disappears off the face of the earth. Very good, but you know, that's his thing. He's got the art of acting down to the fact that you can barely see it, which is great. Michael Winner somehow managed to get an appallingly over-the-top performance out of it. I mean, in a way, it's an achievement, I think. But I don't know.
Do we have any other non-Michael Winner questions?
Yes, I think it's time that I stop now, Michael.
Okay.
Peter, if you got a phone call from your agent, say tomorrow morning,
Yeah.
offering you something
Yeah.
which was new, take your career in a different direction,
Yeah.
what would it be? What particularly excites you as a professional?
Well, I suppose if you know, I'm honest, it would be a film, an exciting type of film, something that I hadn't done, something that moved me into a different area. You know, the one of the frustrating things about being an actor over here is that television doesn't necessarily lead to film in this country. In America, it does. You know, the America's major film stars have all come out of either sitcom or series television. You know, Tom Hanks, you know, a lot of the major ones. Over here, it doesn't work like that. You're far more likely to get a successful film career off the ground through theatre, because that's where the directors for film seem to come from. So there's no direct route still from television into film, which can be a bit frustrating. So yeah, ideally, if you're out tomorrow and said, you know, they want you to play a part in great, nice film, not necessarily a big, snazzy, big budget Hollywood thing, but a good, credible film, Scorsese or something like that. You know. That would be ideal, yeah.
Do you have any ambitions to work behind the camera rather than front?
Yes, in a way I do, but I've always been sort of, you know, prevented by people keep offering me jobs, and you know, when I was making a lot of television, you'd see a lot of directors coming in, and you quite clearly realise after a while, without being arrogant at all, that you could do it better. You know, you did know more about it. You just knew more about it, so you could see them doing shots, and you just think this doesn't work, or why don't we do it like this to be so much better? So while I realised that being an actor and seeing, you know, the odd scene that doesn't work the way it ought to, or a shot that is not good, is quite easy, because you're not being preoccupied with everything else. You're not having to do the whole thing, which I realised a director would be doing. I do sometimes think it would be an interesting thing to do, but whether I have the kind of dedication to give up acting and do that. I think if acting gave me up, you see, I think inside a year I'd be thinking, I want to do this now. But what happens is, I mean, I was going to do the director's course at the BBC, and then someone came along and offered me a series. So then you think, well, okay, so you do that. But yeah, it's there. I mean, I'm aware that sometimes when I'm making a series now, because you get more blasé the more you've done, that I'm very often saying, why don't we do it like this? You know, why don't we shoot it like this? It would be much better. And if the director's okay, that if it's a good idea, they'll take it. You know, they'll do it like that. But if they're slightly more protective, they might take a bit of offence to someone saying, you know, why don't we do it like this? But it's certainly something that is there. I mean, I don't just sort of sit around and wait for my lines when I'm doing a series. I'm very much like want to be in there and thinking, you know, how are we doing this? And I always know exactly where the camera is and what the next shot's going to be and how it's going to cut together. So I'm quite interested in that side of it, yeah.
Well, we're going to take a short break now. We'll have a spot of lunch. For the time being, Peter Davison, thank you very much.
Thank
indeed.
Vodka?
If you want to just go and refresh yourself
Okay,
or
yeah,
whatever,
well,
or
yeah.
we can...
I'll just try and get my phone in, actually.